Liam Hendriks. I think given the fact that he had to have Tommy John surgery late last season, the likelihood of him pitching in 2024 is not particularly great for the club. So this was something that was talked about quite a bit when he was signed during the winter of 2020, the way the contract was structured, such that this fourth and final year was a $15 million guarantee that either would be a lump sum upfront or $1.5 million per year spread out over the course of 10 years. And given the fact that he's not likely to throw a pitch for the White Sox in 2024, I think it makes the most sense in the world for it to space out that payment for $1.5 million per year for the next 10 years. I saw there were a lot of people on the X machine kind of taking issue with this. Obviously, given some of the off-field things that have taken place with Liam Hendriks over the course of the last 6 to 9 months here. But at the end of the day, it's not like they're just throwing him out into the street. He's still getting his money. And again, the probability of him throwing a pitch for the White Sox or any other team in 2024 is not particularly great. So I don't really understand where the angst was coming from with it. And I just think that obviously they're looking at it from an accounting standpoint, and they believe that it is most advantageous for the organization or for the Reinsdorf Family Trust Fund to space out that $15 million.
I mean, I can see where some may take exception with this just based on the feeling that Liam Hendriks is not being taken care of from a team standpoint, right? There's a lot of things that are out there, but as you said, you made a great point. It's not like they're not giving him his money. This could have been a decision that was made regardless of any of the off the field stuff for different circumstances. I don't know. Do you think his time here is actually done? Could this potentially just be Liam Hendriks sits out next season, collects his money, and maybe strikes another deal with the White Sox? They seem to have worked hand in hand with each other. I don't think that Liam and the White Sox have any bad blood over the termination of the contract, the opt-out, any of that stuff. It doesn't seem like that was the case. Is there a possible return? Just very early prediction for Liam Hendriks to the South Side.
I could see it for the 2025 season. To your point, I don't get the sense that there is any bad blood or ill will on either side at this point. I feel like both sides kind of just have the understanding of what the situation is. I think we all realize the competitor and the hashtag TWTW that Liam has. He's going to work his ass off to try to pitch at some point next season. I feel pretty confident in saying that, realizing how quickly he came back from rehabilitating from cancer. And, there were a lot of people that didn't think he was going to pitch at all in 2023. And look what happened there. So he's going to absolutely have the mindset that he's pitching in 2024. Whether that happens in reality, I think remains to be seen. So it wouldn't shock me at all if there is some kind of a restructured deal between the two sides. He does seem to really enjoy being here in the city of Chicago. Now, if he is to miss all of the 2024 season and then start looking into 2025, I think a lot of it's going to depend on where this team is at. That's obviously going to be a focal point of discussions here over the course of the next 3 to 4 months. So does that align with where he is at in his career life cycle at that point? That kind of remains to be seen.
Yeah, well said, Stephen. I just didn't think that there was any possible way that they were going to pick up that option just based on where he's at with his health. And it just makes too much sense at this point to decline it financially. The other one on this list here, the bigger decision, I think, that had to be made was Tim Anderson. Obviously, Tim Anderson, we discussed how horrific his season was on this show. What felt like a night in and night out basis. Just had an abysmal year. I'm sure you've got some stats in front of you on just how bad that was, Steve. I know you pour over all the stats, but final year in his contract, Sox decide we're not gonna pick this up. They've laid out at this point that they are open to having negotiations with Tim Anderson after he explores free agency. I feel like that's just a nice gesture. That's my initial reaction to that, is that's a nice gesture. We can debate up and down what this free agent shortstop market looks like. Hint, hint, it's not good. But that said, this move to me felt like we are clearing this out. They didn't want to pick him up and try and trade him. They didn't want to leave that door
That's
open for
not
him.
true.
Well, interject then. Why is it not true that they didn't want to pick up that option and then trade him?
Well, okay. They didn't want to pick up the option at the $14 million. But if you read White Sox media mouthpiece Boob Nightingale in his column, I think it was from Sunday, they tried to trade him. He wrote about it very specifically, and there were no takers at that $14 million. This is something I tried explaining this to the person that supposedly I share a gene pool with. Jury's still out on that, hashtag unconfirmed. And he couldn't process the idea that a guy coming off of the worst season in baseball would have no trade value at $14 million. Baseball economics exist. Nobody was taking that deal at that price. So if, Bob, for whatever reason, gets information, Kenny's obviously not in the loop anymore. So my guess is that probably is coming directly from he who shall remain nameless himself. And again, he wrote about it very specifically that they attempted to move him, but they could not find a taker. So this was the option of last resort, so to speak.
So with that said, the way I sort of was going into this was they didn't want to pick up at 14 and trade him. And I think you gave a lot of good context as to why. I didn't read that from Mr. Nightingale's column, but it seems like they're betting that he is not going to get anything in free agency. There's been so much talk within the White Sox community on the social media platforms that this was a dumb move. And I mean, everything you said right there just further cements into my head that it was the right move to part ways with Tim Anderson, because who knows what he's going to sign for. Do you see him getting a deal over 1 year at 14 million at this point if no one was willing to make a trade for him?
I personally don't. And what I've kind of heard through the grapevine is that the organization would have interest in bringing him back, but not to play shortstop. Given the problems that they have at the keystone position that they've had for well over a decade, I've written about this too many times. There is some thought that when he goes out into the market, that there could be the possibility for a reunion for him to play second base. And if you look at his Instagram post that he made, he starts by saying, if my time on the South Side ends, if my time ends. I know you feel as though that was kind of a cursory gesture on the team's part, but I think the fact that he's put that out there, he's a guy that, wears his emotions on his sleeve, as we all know. I personally believe that if there was no chance of a reconciliation or a reunion in any capacity, I don't think that word if comes into play.
I was going to get to this one too as well, Steve, and I sort of felt the same way when I saw the if. It just felt to me more like the organization was ready to move on and try and find upgrades here, maybe not even upgrades, just a different path forward. But this leads me to believe that they're going to be active in the shortstop market in some capacity, whether that be a free agent stopgap that comes here specifically to play shortstop, not named Tim Anderson, unless that's a last resort. I know you talked about the rumblings for second base. There was also some Getz comments that we're going to get to later about Yohan Moncada in second base. This right now is such a roster in flux that we have no idea what this is going to look like come opening day. So the fact that it's still a door open to me is okay, but it's going to be an awkward transition, don't you think, for Tim Anderson to come back and play second base for the Chicago White Sox, because that would mean he'd be swallowing quite a bit of pride, in my opinion, to come back and not be the shortstop and maybe not your leadoff guy next season. There's a lot at play here, but I don't think that Tim Anderson has the same bargaining power that he did when he was the staple in the leadoff spot and at shortstop anytime 6 days a week before he needed Sunday off.
You're right in that assessment, and that was one of the things that I wrote about today at a lovely website you might be familiar with called ontapsportsnet.com. If you go and if you look at Tim's numbers since he came off of the IL June 20th of last year from the groin injury, and then there's the wrist issue and everything else that has taken place since then, he's been the worst offensive player in the sport. That coupled with the defensive miscues that have unfortunately been a little bit more prevalent, I would say, in the last year and a half, that hasn't helped his value from that standpoint. So there may just have to be some self-reflection and some understanding that the days of being that shortstop, manning that position, I don't know of too many teams that are willing to entrust that responsibility to him at this point, given the struggles that we have seen since June of last year. So it could just come down to a scenario where you've got a choice to make. Do you want to hold out thinking that somebody is going to let you play shortstop, or do you want to be realistic and sign on with a team? I remember last winter, there were a lot of people that were saying that Elvis Andrus was going to get a starting shortstop job somewhere based off of the final 2 months he had when he came over to the Sox. How did that play out?
He wound up signing pretty late.
And what position did he sign to play?
Second base.
Okay. So there is precedent for it. I think that's something that we just have to be mindful of. Again, there's a case to be made that this relationship just needs to be completely dissolved and that both sides need to kind of go their separate ways and have a fresh start. You can make that case right there.
I'm in that camp.
You know, I think it goes both ways. Personally, I'm of the mindset that however this plays out, I don't think it really has that much of an impact on the long-term trajectory of the White Sox next fluke winning season in 2027, because I don't think Tim Anderson will be around by then anyway.